regretters here. I've never been here before. Ah! It's not hot! Wait, why am I yelling? Billy, Billy, Billy! Nobody's ever been able to defeat Brian Zane, except... Now that I think about it, everyone you ever wrestled beat you up. But it doesn't matter. It goes like this. Now your demise is etched in stone! I said, your demise is etched in stone. That was a cue. Come on, guys.
It is without question that Hulk Hogan is one of the biggest and most important figures in wrestling history. You might not like his in-ring style, or his backstage politics, or his tall tales, or his flagrant racism.
I'm not a double standard type guy. I'm racist to a point. Yeah.
But the fact remains that if it weren't for Hogan's run in the 1980s, wrestling as we know it could have turned out very different. Think of how insane it must have been to be Hulk Hogan in the mid-1980s. You were the guy at what would become the largest wrestling company in America and the world. Your name and face was put on anything the company could sell, selling out arenas, touring the world, wrestling 7 days a week and twice on Sundays, sacrificing all semblance of a normal life to entertain millions of fans. When looking back, it's easy to see why the Hulk Hogan experiment worked so well. He had a great look and unmatched charisma, paired with entertaining storylines and angles that saw him topple some of the biggest, meanest, nastiest guys to ever grace the squared circle. Now back then, that approach worked like a charm. Can't say the same thing about that in 1994 though. The Hulkster's signing with WCW was a pivotal moment in wrestling's modern history. The man who was once the World Wrestling Federation's biggest star joining their direct competition was a huge deal. It'd be like if Derek Jeter left the New York Yankees to play for the Boston Red Sox. It kicked the war between the two companies into another gear. But now that WCW had Hulk in the fold, what were they going to do with him? Well, why not use the same formula that worked so well in the WWF? That'll get the fans to cheer Hogan, right? Right? It's time to talk about the Dungeon of Doom, long heralded as one of the cheesiest things in the history of the business. That's right, the same company that brought us Spin the Wheel, Make the Deal, White Castle of Fear, Cheatham the One-Eyed Midget Blowing Up a Boat, RoboCop, Lost in Cleveland, and the No Limit Soldiers were able to truly outdo themselves with this one. A group that was created with the sole purpose of getting one man and one man only over with the fans. The DoD hung around longer than anyone could have expected, finally shutting down long after its relevance had expired. How could something so silly dominate the company for so long? Let's take a closer look and find out. Upon signing with WCW in '94, the Hulkster showed how good of a super pal he was by getting all his friends to come over to the new playground as well. Randy Savage, Brutus Beefcake, the Nasty Boys, and Jimmy Hart were just some of the many folks to cross into enemy territory for fewer dates and more money well after their biggest drawing years. Hogan's very first contest in the company was a dream match for the world title against Ric Flair, which the Hulkster won handily. After blowing their wad and beginning on such a high note, where else could Hogan possibly go? For that answer, we turn to Kevin Sullivan, a man who returned to WCW not too long before Hogan's historic signing. Upon his return, he began teaming up with the Equalizer, now renamed Dave Sullivan, Kevin's kayfabe brother.
My brother Dave is a special individual.
Yeah, it's EVAD, Kevin, EVAD.
He's dyslexic.
So yes, Kevin Sullivan now has a dyslexic brother named Dave who refers to himself as EVAD because that's how dyslexia works. Dave, who is portrayed as naive and childlike, goes gaga for Hulk Hogan now that he's signed with the company. This lights a fire of jealousy under brother Kevin, who vows to destroy Hulkamania in response. Before I go any further, I just want to reiterate the fact that Kevin Sullivan embarked on what would become a multi-year war with Hulk Hogan simply because he wasn't his brother's favorite wrestler anymore. That makes Kevin Sullivan the most justified and tragic villain in WCW history. Before the Dungeon of Doom officially began, Sullivan formed the Three Faces of Fear. That's Kevin, Avalanche, and the Butcher. Avalanche is the former Earthquake who was given one of the laziest rechristenings imaginable, but hey, a natural disaster is a natural disaster, am I right? The Butcher, of course, is Ed Leslie, better known as Brutus Beefcake, better known as Brutus the fucking Barber Beefcake. One of the first people Hogan brought with him to WCW, Leslie was revealed to be the masked man who'd been attacking Hogan for weeks, turning heel upon the reveal and being given the Butcher name. I'm guessing it was because the word can be used to describe someone who's bad at being a barber, but that may be too obvious. The Three Faces of Fear reached their highest point at Starrcade 1994, where the Butcher challenged former best friend Hulk Hogan for the WCW Championship in the main event in a losing effort. Again, this fact bears repeating. Brutus Beefcake fought Hulk Hogan for the World Championship in the main event of the biggest show of the year for WCW in the year 1994. That's both the setup and the punchline. On we go to the spring of '95. As Hogan moved on to a feud with Vader and Evad Sullivan went full Eugene, the Three Faces of Fear more or less dissolved. After Slamboree, Kevin found himself on a spirit journey, following a voice that led him through the woods and into a cave, where he met the Master, a being that had been alive for thousands of years. The Master was portrayed by King Curtis Iaukea, who got into the role by covering himself in asbestos. After drinking a goblet full of dry ice and painting some horns on his head, Sullivan became the Taskmaster, which I'm guessing is just one rank below Master. Is it me, or is there something in the air in this dungeon that makes it impossible for anyone inside to control the volume of their voice?
The real white-fingered tiger! I've never been here before!
The slaughter of the immortal Hulk Hogan!
Ah! It's not hot!
It was here that the Dungeon of Doom was truly born, as Sullivan assembled a team that would destroy the red and yellow for good. Like, for example, the Butcher, who had now turned into the Zodiac.
Yes! No! No! Yes! Yes! No!
Okay, that's a bit of a leap from the Butcher, but I'll allow it. Well, moving on to the next member of the group, another former member of the Three Faces of Fear, here's the Avalanche. Okay, that's not an avalanche. That's an abomination. What in the Sam Hill is this? Who convinced John Tenta to go from an earthquake to an avalanche to a goddamn shark? It's bad enough that Tenta had to suffer the indignity of walking around with giant shark teeth painted on his face, but perhaps even worse was his tiger tattoo, which was made to honor his alma mater of Louisiana State University, had been covered up with a tattoo of a shark, I think. To his credit, Tenta later said that it was his idea to change the tattoo and not something forced upon him by WCW. Way to take one for the team, I guess, but I hope he was compensated well for that. Soon Kamala, the Ugandan giant and the most awkward cameo in Diva Search history, would join the fold, because if there's one thing this group needed more of, it was guys in spooky face paint. After putting a big dragon head on Meng and adding Vader to the fold, the core of the dungeon was formed and ready to tank on Hogan, who beat their ass at every turn. Yes, it was all part of the plan for the Hulkster, who had convinced WCW to basically recreate what worked in the 1980s to get him cheered by the fans. This despite the fact that we were years removed from the height of Hulkamania by now, and that WCW fans were very familiar with Hogan's MO and didn't care that much for it to begin with. Many fans in WCW had a predisposition to not liking Hogan for a variety of reasons, and this retread of slaying monsters was not helping matters. But things would get interesting when a certain newcomer to the industry showed up to break the walls down. Oh right, it was him. Why was I thinking of somebody else? Quite possibly the dungeon's biggest success story was the Giant, who by this point we had only previously seen for a brief moment at Slamboree earlier in the year, then again at Fall Brawl. The Giant claimed to be the son of Andre the Giant, coming for revenge on the Hulkster after what happened between he and Andre nearly a decade earlier.
Then all of a sudden I felt this aura, this presence. I felt Andre, man, right in my face.
As the weeks went on, the future Big Show would torment the Hulkster. At the Fall Brawl, he tried to break Hogan's neck, and before that, he ran over Hulk's motorcycle with a monster truck. It's really one of the more subdued parts of this angle, really. But the true injustice happened on the October 2nd edition of Nitro, when Sullivan, disguised as an old lady, attacked Hogan and shaved his mustache off. Well, what else is he gonna do, shave his head?
She's a stunt granny.
If the sight of the Taskmaster in drag and a clean-shaven Hogan weren't strange enough, shit started getting really weird.
The Macho Man is on a mission. He's gonna bring us the head of Ming on a silver platter.
Again, between this and the album that came out around the same time, huge midlife crisis. In what could best be described as WCW testing the waters of a Hogan heel turn that would happen less than a year later, the world champion eschewed his red and yellow look, trading it in for his best Wesley costume and claiming he needed to fight fire with fire by embracing the dark side of Hulkamania. This oft-forgotten chapter in Hogan's career was scrapped about a month and a half after it started by World War III in November, when he decided to return to the Hulkster of old. Then he proceeded to take a shot at the Wrestling Observer out of pure pettiness, claiming that Savage was not working with an injured arm, when in fact he was.
Observe this, brother!
But back to the matter at hand, from a storyline perspective, this move by Hogan actually made some sense. It was important for him to reach deep down to a dark place in his soul as he took on the biggest challenge he'd had in years. After all, how can you explain his willingness to commit murder?
Get him off of there! No!
Oh my God.
This, ladies and gents, is the final visual of the Monster Truck Sumo match, which took place at Halloween Havoc 1995. After several minutes of pushing, and pushing, and pushing, and pushing, and pushed it. Fuck. Anyway, after Darth Hogan won this incredibly stupid match, he went and pushed the Giant off the roof of Cobo Hall, presumably to his death, until the big nasty bastard showed up moments later for their title match, showing absolutely no damage with no explanation for how he survived the fall. The WCW title match ended with a whole lot of bullshit, as Jimmy Hart went rogue and attacked the referee, then his man Hogan. Lex Luger got involved as well, and the two of them revealed they had joined the Dungeon of Doom. Then, the Yeti. It was time to see everyone's favorite misclassified monster, the Yeti, who was really more of a mummy. Debuting the previous week by bursting out of a penis-shaped block of ice in the final seconds of the Go Home Nitro, he showed up here once again, so he and Giant could dry hump the hell out of the Hulkster. The following night on Nitro, Jimmy Hart revealed that the Giant had become the new champion, thanks to a stipulation that he had kept a secret from Hogan that allowed the title to change hands on a disqualification, which he himself initiated. Holy shit, did we just see a reverse Dusty finish? The title was held up due to the resoundingly bullshit way that the Giant had won it, leading to a 60-man battle royal at World War III to determine the new champ. Randy Savage would win that match, busted arm and all. Take that, Meltzer! While that was going on, the Dungeon would slough off some of their original members and gain some new ones. In particular, Hugh Morris, the Barbarian, the One Man Gang, and Loch Ness, better known to UK wrestling fans as Giant Haystacks. It appeared that Nessie and Hogan were on a collision course, but an official match never happened, as Haystacks had to leave the company soon after debuting to address his cancer diagnosis, but not before putting the Giant over in a very bad match at Uncensored 1996. Uncensored 96, Why does that show sound so familiar to me? By this point, the Dungeon of Doom was beginning to fall apart at the seams. The Zodiac, once a cornerstone of the group, revealed he was a spy for Hulk Hogan the entire time and left. So in kayfabe, that means either Brutus and Hogan beat the crap out of each other multiple times to keep the ruse going, or they actually worked soft on each other and pretended to get hurt. You know, wrestling. Kevin Sullivan's position of power was also in question, both in storyline and in real life, especially after being publicly punked out by Brian Pillman 1 month earlier.
I respect you, Booker Man.
Thus, the Dungeon joined forces with Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, dubbing themselves the Alliance to End Hulkamania. Scooping up Zeus and Bane along the way, fans bore witness to one of the most ridiculous main events of all time, the Doomsday Cage match. Pitting Hogan and Savage against 8 freaking people, the good guys were able to win the day after getting some help from the Booty Man himself and his frying pans. Well, it makes sense. A cartoony group of villains deserves to get beat up with cartoony weapons. Fast forward to Bash at the Beach on July 7th, 1996, the night that Hogan finally pulled the trigger on his heel turn, forming the New World Order with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. With Hogan now a bad guy, the Dungeon was left without a purpose, yet they continued to hang around. As Sullivan feuded with the Horsemen, most notably versus Chris Benoit, it was time to reboot the group. Because in a company that featured at one time the NWO, the Four Horsemen, and the Dungeon of Doom, well, which one of those were you going to put more time and effort into? Thanks to their Hollywood connections, the DoD were able to shoot a highly produced vignette on the set of the film Batman and Robin. Not surprisingly, this would be a better production than the film Batman and Robin. In this vignette, we see the dungeon add Max Muscle and Big Bubba to their ranks, plus we see the return of the Giant, who had just been part of the NWO for all of 3 months before getting kicked out, and he would eventually rejoin the NWO. Man, even back then the guy couldn't stop doing face and heel turns. The group also added a guy by the name of Braun, and wait, Braun? Wait, are you telling me that Braun Strowman was actually part of the Dungeon of Doom? Roll the clip!
Oh, Braun!
Oh, I'm sorry. This is actually Braun the Leprechaun who joined the group. Honest mistake. Former US champion Conan and future WWF Women's Champion Jacqueline would join later, but it was just a band-aid solution for a stable that was on life support. At Bash the Beach 1997, 1 year after the formation of the NWO, Sullivan lost a retirement match to Benoit after a betrayal by Jackie, effectively putting the final merciful nail in the Dungeon's coffin. And that was the life and times of the Dungeon of Doom. We saw a master, a giant, a dyslexic brother, a shark, a cannibal, a Loch Ness monster, a leprechaun, Hulk Hogan as a 2-bit Zorro, and a Yeti. Was it ridiculous? Yes. Did it go on for way too long? Absolutely. But you know what? In a roundabout way, it actually succeeded in its mission of putting an end to Hulkamania. So, good job everyone! Well played, well played! The Dungeon of Doom was, for all intents and purposes, a Hulk Hogan vanity project, an excuse for Hogan to wrestle his friends almost exclusively for the sole objective of getting people to cheer for him, and they couldn't even pull that off. Throw in some of the worst acting ever seen on television, wrestling or otherwise, and it becomes iconic in its awfulness. Out of everyone who came and went to the Dungeon's doors, the Giant would go on to have the best career out of any of them. But why even bother putting him through the rigmarole of entering and leaving and re-entering the group like he did? WCW could have built this guy up to be a megastar without the Dungeon of Doom, or the NWO for that matter, and it would have been totally fine. Kevin Sullivan himself has said that the ends justified the means, and he has a point. The goal of the Dungeon of Doom, and the 3 Faces of Fear before it, was to get Hogan over. And even though the goal of making Hogan universally beloved didn't pan out, it did open the door to make the fans hate him once he turned heel in '96. If it weren't for the Dungeon's persistence, the payoff of Hogan's betrayal might not have had the same oomph it wound up having. So if you look at it that way, the goofiest troupe in all of wrestling may be one of the most important. Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, comment below, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.
I gotta sing the Doom song now! Doom, 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 doom,
Would you please stop singing?